Hey everybody, Elizabeth Nader back with you on Jersey First TV and the Nader Narrative. I'm so excited about this show. I've been wanting and looking forward to talking to Bob Healey, who we're going to bring on here in a second, about the Republican convention. Now, look, guys, this is a moving target every single day, what's going on in our nation. It's incredible. It's really unprecedented. But last week's convention was something to behold. And if you've never been to a convention or you only saw parts of it on TV, you probably wonder what's really going on there. What was it like? We're going to talk about that with Bob because he was there. He's going to give us his perspective, and we're going to dig into a little bit what all these things might mean for the nation. It's been a fascinating few weeks. It's been scary. It's been exhilarating. It's been all the different kind of emotions. But I thought we should have a conversation with somebody who has his own unique perspective, which is Bob Healey. And you guys will remember he ran for Congress in the last cycle. I would call him an important part of our party in New Jersey, an influencer who has a great viewpoint as a conservative. We need him in our party. He's a successful businessman and very good at yoga, by the way, which, you know what, just makes him that much more valuable. So let's get to it. Bob Healey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I was looking around trying to figure out who you were talking about.
Yeah, right. No, come on. These are all the things that are true about you. And the more that people get to know you, I think the more people realize that we need your voice in this party. So Bob, we're going to talk about the convention, and this is an every 4-year occurrence. A lot of people watch it on TV. I grew up watching it on TV. I remember, when Reagan got nominated. I remember a lot of things. Now I'm really involved in politics. I didn't go this time. You did. I want an insider's view because we are in such a historic moment. So let's start with this. Why were you there, and how did that all happen?
Well, after running, I wasn't all that political before I ran, Elizabeth, as we talked about before last time I was on your show. But after running, I've stayed close. I've tried to help other people who are doing this. And I've just tried to make myself useful to the party in New Jersey. And so the chairman of Burlington County asked if I wanted to be an alternate delegate. And it was tough because I just, had my daughter. She's 9 weeks now, so she was about 7 weeks when I left. And I sort of didn't know whether it was something that I should do or not. And I really thought hard about it. And the first thing I thought was, to your point just a second ago, this only happens once every 4 years.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just a coronation of the sitting president, as it was back in 2020 for Donald Trump. Right. And so, when am I ever going to go when really there's been a real primary, there's been some real back and forth, there's been, and see what it looks like for a party to either come together or not come together.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go. Had a wedding in Rhode Island that weekend for some very close friends. So my wife said to me, you can go, but you have to leave Thursday to come home and drive up with our 2 kids, which is fair. Yeah. So I thought, okay, I'll skip the last day. I've heard Donald Trump speak. I would love to hear him speak again, but I've heard it. Right. And I want to see whoever at that time the vice presidential pick is. I want to hear them speak. I want to hear some of the other speakers, and I want to experience it. I'll get that full experience and leave Thursday. And then, of course, we all know what happened Saturday before.
Right. And that changes everything. So your plans suddenly are different.
Right. And I thought to myself, well, this could be a very historic speech.
Yeah.
Coming that close to death, I don't care who you are. I don't care whether you hate Donald Trump or you love Donald Trump or you have no opinion of Donald Trump. From a human perspective, coming that close to death has got to at least make you think. If it doesn't, make you change a little bit. And so I thought, I really want to hear Donald Trump speak. Yeah. I want to hear, he's going to have to talk about this. And I want to hear what he has to say. And so I got the blessing of my wife to stay Thursday and meet them in Rhode Island. And so I got to stay for the whole thing.
That's amazing. And kudos to her because it truly was a historic speech. But to your point, though, had it not been for the assassination attempt, there is so much else that goes on, certainly prior to that. So I want people to understand, what is happening. We see all the speeches and, of course, announcing the VP pick, that was important and you wanted to see that. But I want you to give people some context for what is going on even outside those doors. As a party, what is happening? What is the business that's happening?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take you through what it's like to approach the convention, what happens outside the convention hall, but in the convention proper, and then the convention itself. Because first off, the security in Milwaukee was ridiculous. And even more so, given what happened in September, they bolstered everything up. So the convention itself was blocked off for many blocks. If you took a bus in with your delegation, the bus got to skate through all the security because they did it when you got on the bus, and then you were let right into the sort of the convention proper, the convention grounds proper. It happened in the Fiserv Arena, but there were blocks of things going on all around it. Once you got through security, and I have to tip my hat, they had sort of a security force from all over. I met state troopers from New Jersey there.
Really?
From all parts of the country, California, everywhere. And it was cool. You're in line, you're talking to them. They're from a different part of the country. It was fun. Once you got through security, there's a couple of blocks around the Fiserv Arena that are totally blocked off. Some of the restaurants are still open, but there are halls that are rented out, and people are doing all sorts of things. They're selling merchandise. There's food stands. I mean, it's kind of a carnival atmosphere.
Yeah.
Great people watching.
Yeah.
And book signings. Marjorie Taylor Greene had a book signing. A whole bunch of people. And if you want to really dive into sort of the Republican culture, for lack of a better term, I guess, you can do it there. And you will meet people just walking around from all walks of life. And the first thing that I thought of was, that was a really diverse crowd.
Yeah.
That's even before I got into the arena.
Yeah.
It's like, you've got Hispanic people who have come, African Americans, Indians, Southeast Asians. You've got men, women, kids. People are bringing their kids. It's just a very diverse crowd. People who are extremely farther to the right than maybe I am. People who are more in the center than I am. And you're talking to them. And one of the things I will tell you, outside and inside the convention, no arguments. Nobody is yelling at each other. There was this atmosphere, maybe it was because of what happened on Saturday, of now is the time to sort of come together.
Yeah.
Now is, and I think Saturday had a lot to do with it. It's sort of a really good reality check. Our words matter. What we say to each other matters. How we treat one another matters. Yeah. And so maybe because of that, people were on better behavior than they might have been. Sure. Or maybe there was just a sense of a shared sort of relationship through that what happened on Saturday. Then you go to the Fiserv Arena and you get it. There are sort of two levels in the Fiserv Arena. You're either a delegate and you can get on the floor, or so that's the Fiserv Arena is where they do all the basketball games out there in Milwaukee. So you either get on the court floor, and there's a large stage, and any of your viewers can go and Google some of those speeches. They'll see the stage, they'll see the setup, they can see delegates on the floor. You might even glimpse New Jersey. We were in the back, stage right. Stage right. And then there's also then the seats of the arena. And if you're not a delegate, you get to sit there and watch it. I was lucky enough to sort of smuggle myself onto the floor as an alternate delegate for 2 nights. And then I was a delegate. I was an alternate to somebody who couldn't make it Thursday. And I was on the floor in my own right Thursday night. Nice. And so the business of what happens there is Tuesday, each of the delegations from each of the states stands up and offers all of their votes up to their candidate, their pick for president. Now, at least in the Republican Party, we can talk about what the Democrats are doing right now. That can be dicey. If you remember back in 2016, not everybody threw their name in the ring for Donald Trump, even though he was the nominee. There were shouts of dissent. Yep. Everybody on the floor, as far as I remember at least, cast their votes for Donald Trump, including New Jersey. Yeah. And then after that, there are speakers, and the speakers go from about 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock or 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. So it's like 4 hours of speaking. It sounds like a lot. The time actually passes pretty quickly. I think a lot of that's because they were really good speakers. Yeah. So on Wednesday, Amber Rose spoke. And if any of your viewers haven't watched her speech, go and watch it.
It's excellent.
It's excellent.
Yep.
I have a lot of respect for anybody who can come out and say, I thought one way, I did some research, now I think a different way.
Yeah.
And she was very eloquent.
Yeah.
And she made a really good case for how her thought process got her to be there that day. And she talked about the pressures of actually taking that step to speak at the convention.
Right.
Wednesday, they picked the Donald Trump on Tuesday announced his vice presidential nominee. I think it was Tuesday night, or was it Wednesday morning? The days kind of blur together. And Wednesday, they ratified the vice presidential pick, which was J.D. Vance. And then Wednesday evening, J.D. Vance spoke. So I think it was Tuesday. I think Tuesday they picked him. So Wednesday he spoke.
Right.
And there were some great speakers on Wednesday. And then Thursday was sort of the main event. So Thursday, everything is ratified. The business on the floor is done. And you've got just a whole host of interesting speakers. Harken back to my childhood, Hulk Hogan spoke.
Right. Right. I'm with you on that. Yep.
And I actually thought his speech was good because he came out and he did the Hulkamaniac thing. He got the crowd roared up.
Sure.
But then he said, listen, my real name is Terry White, and this is why I'm here. And he talked not as Hulk Hogan, but as a citizen.
Right.
Dana White introduced Donald Trump, which I thought was super interesting. If you're a UFC fan, that would have been a great thing for you.
Yeah.
And then you had Donald Trump speak at the end of that. And there were so many other good speakers.
Well, let's talk about, hold on one second on that, because I want to talk about through the convention, how they intentionally had everyday Americans behind the mic. Now you're, kind of painting a picture here, which is interesting, which I think the media would tend to just gloss over. You're saying there's a lot of diversity. You're saying there was a lot of unity, at least at a high level, but that the crowd wasn't what they always try to really paint the Republicans as, the white man's party. But we actually have the diversity. We have the diversity with the genders, with race, with even maybe financial status, blue collar, white collar. It feels like what you're saying is that was all represented. And then behind the mic are these everyday Americans. What did you think? Like, do you remember those speeches? Because those, I think, really moved the needle. Which one stood out to you?
Well, to speak to your diversity piece for a minute, from my experience, you had every swath of the socioeconomic scale there, and you had every race, color, and creed you could imagine on that floor. On the floor. Forget about the crowd. Delegates on the floor.
Right.
And the crowd even more so. And everybody got along. Everybody, people would give up their seats. If somebody older had to sit, they would sit in a section that wasn't New Jersey or Arkansas was next to us. Somebody from Arkansas, you give up your seat. I mean, it was just. Yeah. And then when it comes to the everyday Americans, they had a speaker on Wednesday night talking about her son who was murdered from fentanyl, died of fentanyl overdose in the inner city, African-American woman. I think of maybe less so an everyday American, but somebody who certainly represents a large swath of everyday Americans. The head of the Teamsters spoke. And regardless of how you feel on that topic, for that person to come there and speak, I think speaks volumes about who the Republican Party is choosing to speak to this time. So you can argue whether you're pro-union, not for unions, you don't care about unions. But what you can argue is that the people that work for unions are typically a swath of the country that Democrats tend to claim as their own.
Right.
Now, he didn't endorse Donald Trump. That may come later. But for him to be there is all but an endorsement.
That was a moment for sure. And I think what is the thread through all of this, whether it be the Teamsters guy or an everyday American, is they were talking about really the policies of the last 4 years and how it's affected their lives. It's affected, in this case of this woman, her son dying of fentanyl poisoning, not an overdose. Let's be clear, he wasn't a drug addict. He could be your son or my son, God forbid.
One time.
And I tell my kids that all the time. It's one time, and it's the kids that are actually making good choices, but it's one time. And so we have this direct connection between what people are experiencing in their lives and some horrific stories, and also just people that can't afford groceries or just all these things that are happening. In the case of the Teamsters, really, where are these jobs going? This is all connected back to the policies of the last 4 years. That was very clear when I was watching from home. Do you feel like that message will impact the everyday American who hasn't made their decision yet, that they understand that their vote is connected to how they experience life in this country?
I would hope so. Let's I don't know how many people watch those speeches. You and I do, because this is our thing, right? This is what we enjoy. I would hope. My hope is that people who maybe wouldn't have normally watched, maybe because of what happened Saturday, maybe because of who's running on the Republican ticket, for whatever reason, tuned in and watched some of these. I think one of the more interesting speeches was three people who worked directly with President Trump in his personal life. So one of them was his lawyer. Now, she is a Iraqi American, or half Iraqi American, I believe. Her parents are Iraqi, and a Muslim, and she talked about being his lawyer, right, in the middle of all of this lawfare that's going on, being next to him every day, and what that looked like. She told this wonderful story where she was walking out of the courtroom, and she was talking to Trump on the phone, and somebody recognized her and shouted words of encouragement for Trump. And Trump heard it on the phone, and he said, "Who is that?" And she said, "Oh, it's some person outside the courtroom." And he said, "Give him the phone." And Trump talked to the phone for a couple of minutes and said, "Thank you very much." Right? He talked about they had the golf pro on. He started as a caddy at Trump National and eventually became a pro because Trump said to him, "I'll give you a shot. Come play around the golf with me." And has built his whole career working for one person, one business. And he talked about how difficult it's been for him, in the last couple of years. And I think those stories, those are everyday people. That's a lawyer. That's a caddy who became a golf pro, right?
Yeah, those are everyday people that have the both parts of this, which I find interesting, is not only sharing what's impacting them based on living in this country in the past 4 years. And I think it's touched all of us in some way, but also giving insight into who Trump it really is. Now, again, I agree with you. You don't have to love him. We don't need to make him the Messiah. He's not. But I do think we have to have a sober and realistic view of who the man is. And I do believe that character matters. So we're not looking for perfection here, and I'm not expecting it. However, if we start to pick apart character, those people that work for him, those people who maybe some of the elites would consider small people, but they've had an experience with this guy that says this is who he really is. That's a message that's always been hard to get out to those who only listen to the demonizing messages and all of what the media has talked about. Do you think that we're able to get to connect with people? Do you think that, sadly, Saturday helped humanize him?
I think so. The first thing I would say is if I want to know anything about anyone, I typically ask the three people I know who are closest to them, because that'll give me not the three most important people in their lives, not their boss, the three people who are closest to them, because that will give you sort of the idea of what the person is really like. And I think that if you listen to those speeches, you got some idea of that. When it comes to the events of Saturday, that previous Saturday, I think there's a very human level that it takes. It has to take your viewpoint of Donald Trump down to, insofar as no matter what we feel about in politics, nobody, I don't think, I would hope, nobody wants to see anybody get physically hurt here. Yeah. It's just, as a matter of fact, our republic was founded on the idea that is not the way that we conduct politics. Right. It was set up very intentionally that these things don't happen from men and women who experienced that and who saw that and who understood history. And so I think that it did two things. I don't know what the viewership was on the speeches, but my guess is it was probably higher than it would have normally been, particularly Thursday evening.
Right.
And from my experience on the floor, it really did give a feeling of we're in this together. We all have to start really treating each other just a little better. Yeah. And we have to stop judging people on their worst day. Yeah. And maybe try to judge them on their best day. And I think, look, not to wax philosophical here, Elizabeth, but I think if we all did that a little more in our lives, politics or otherwise, our life would be a little better.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of us were hoping that we would see that message coming from the stage, and I think we did. I don't know how long it lasts. The environment we're in is pretty toxic, and of course now we've had all the changes since the Republican convention. We've had the changes on the Democrat side, and we seem to have fallen right back into the personal attacks. It really didn't seem to last long. I want you to talk a little bit about the differences of these two candidates, because you're a businessman who decided to throw your hat in the ring to help this country and run for Congress. I'm not sure what you're planning to do in the future, but maybe there's something else out there. But you're somebody who grew up in the business world. You understand it. And I always say, when you sign the front of a check, it's a totally different viewpoint of the world. So we have this businessman in Donald Trump, right? And all the choices he's made in life and what we've seen there. And then we have, on the Democrat side, we really have career politicians in many ways. That's what we're up against. Do you see that difference? Does that difference matter to you? And do you think that difference should matter to the voter?
Business people like some sort of stability. And if I'm looking at the Democrat side right now, it's got anything but that. You have a president in Joe Biden who may have been mentally competent when he took office, but is certainly, and I think even the other side and the media agrees, they obviously agree, because they, he stepped down like Caesar stepped down.
Yeah.
Agrees that he's no longer mentally fit to at least do another 4 years. It's a whole other discussion about whether he's the guy to continue running the country for the next couple of months, 3.5 months, but at least for the next 4 years. And then they brought in Kamala Harris. Now, I give the Democrats some credit here. The fix was in from the start. I mean, the way that those delegates consolidated behind her, I think speaks to two things. One, I think it speaks to a lot of groundwork. Whenever Biden decided that he was going to step down, my guess is they knew days before they started to lay that groundwork. The second thing I would tell you is, I think it's high right now of the people who wanted anybody but Trump to get behind somebody who they might not otherwise really like, which is Kamala Harris. How long that stays, that's anybody's guess. I mean, everybody's excited right now. As you and I both know, 3.5 months is a lifetime.
A lifetime. I mean, look what's happened in 3 weeks. I mean, one could have never guessed. So do you, when people say this is the election of our lifetime, now a lot of times that gets said about a lot of different elections, but having been at the convention, having experienced history, really you did, and coming back with all of that, do you look at this election as consequential as they're saying?
I look at it as a moment in history, certainly. It's one of the reasons I stayed. I remember saying to my wife about Thursday, it's very rare that people realize that they're living through history. You might go through something and look back on it and say, oh yeah, that was a moment in history that I lived through. But it's very rare that you know that it's happening at the time. And I said to her, I don't know what's going to happen Thursday night when Donald Trump speaks. But on the off chance that it's a moment in history, I want to be there.
Sure. I
think back to 1968 because there's a lot of parallels to that. Lyndon B. Johnson decided not to sort of not as late as Joe Biden stepped out, but late enough in the cycle. Robert Kennedy decided to run and was assassinated.
Yeah.
You had a lot of, it was racial unrest, social unrest in the country, and you had violence outside of the Democratic National Convention. I think that Thursday night, and I think the convention in general was a point in history, certainly. How consequential it becomes, I think, also matters with what happens at the Democratic National Convention, which I'm going to watch because I'm interested to see the comparison.
I bet you are.
Some of it may be really tough for me to watch, and I'm going to muscle through it. I'm as interested as what happens on that floor as what happens outside that convention. There were some protesters outside the Republican convention. There were some right-wing protesters, too, people who felt that Donald Trump wasn't their person. But what I would say is it was fairly muted. They were respectful. I passed right by him with a delegate badge, and nobody gave me a ton of trouble.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's going to be. I hope it's that way. I mean this. I hope it's that way outside the Democratic National Convention, but I don't know that it will be. And so I think we are living at a moment in history. How consequential is this election? Well, let's talk about it. Joe Biden has put forward that he's going to radically change the Supreme Court if he got another 4 years. And I think Kamala Harris has said roughly the same thing. That goes to the very fabric of our Constitution. And that's a real concern. If I'm a business owner, from a business owner's perspective, that's a concern for me. Yeah. Because I will tell you that my biggest challenge in business, it's not competition. I'll take competition all day long. That's an open market. I'm happy to have competition. Right. Regulation, it's government regulation, state regulation, federal regulation. Because when the federal government decides through an agency or through the Supreme Court that I can't do something, I'm left with very little recourse other than my elected representatives. So I think this is a consequential election because of that. I also think it's a consequential election because in Kamala Harris, the Democrats are going to have 100 days or less to try to paint her as not Joe Biden and not encumbered by any of the last 3.5 years of their time in the executive branch. And I think they've got an uphill slope to do that. But here's what I would say if you're a Republican. Do not take this lying down.
Oh, agreed.
Very easy to come out of that convention. And I heard it on the convention floor. Now, remember, Biden was president then. We got this. We're going to win. And hey, as a Republican, particularly a Republican in New Jersey, where you and I are an endangered species every day.
Yes, we are.
It was nice to hear that and feel that. And at least for 4 days, be like, yeah, we're going to win. This is great.
Yeah.
Once I got out and I got away from everything for a day or two. And then when Kamala Harris, when Joe Biden stepped down and Kamala Harris became, I guess we can call her the presumptive nominee. She's not yet. I have concerns. I have concerns because Kamala Harris is either uncomfortable funny, right? She cackles at inopportune times. She gets nervous, or she's just funny enough that people feel like maybe they like her. And let's be honest about this, Elizabeth. I wish that elections were always decided on the issues and how people have done on the issues.
Yes.
But in the reality that we live in, where you've got a news cycle that, God, I have whiplash from the last 10 days of this news cycle.
Yeah.
A lot of times it can come down to how people perceive them to have done their job rather than how they've actually done their job.
Because people aren't looking into things, Bob, and I will say this, you're a lot younger than I am. So it's like somewhat just by your generation, I'm not sure where they all break, but someone said something interesting to me the other day that the younger generation who's now voting, first of all, they feel like this is their Barack Obama moment. Second of all, they're not upset that somebody was sort of coronated for them because we have raised them with a lot of bubble wrap around them, right? Participation trophies and everything is easy. So they don't want to do the hard work. They don't want to think for themselves. Go ahead, think for me, tell me what I should do. That's dangerous. And if that's a generation that's up and coming, they're not willing to do critical thinking because we're not teaching critical thinking, then all they do is watch the news and get the impression, as you said, and don't look at the issues. That worries me.
Well, I think as Republicans, what we've got to remember, if you're a Republican, is that, yes, she was coronated. Yes, the party that claims that they're here to save democracy did one of the more undemocratic things they've done in the last 50 years or more. Yeah. Yes, there's questions about whether Joe Biden or Kamala Harris should have access to the campaign funds that are for Joe Biden, although my suspicion is that she will.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a whole lot of things that we can call on. You got to be in charge to be able to fix those things. And Donald Trump, not funny enough, I think rightly enough, had a video that played at least 3 or 4 times every day when I was on the floor there. It would pop up on the big screen in the Fiserv Arena, and it was about election integrity. And here's basically what he said. I know everybody's worried about election integrity. I know how many people feel about voting early, voting mail-in. Here's what I'm telling you. Vote early. Vote mail-in. Yeah. Do whatever you have to do to get your vote in, because the only way we can solve election integrity is to be in charge, to be able to solve it.
Amen.
And listen, I've got issues. I'm a guy who likes to go to the polls. I like bringing my daughter to the polls.
Yeah.
I think it's fun. I think it's cool. Maybe I'm a dork.
I love it too. Day of, right?
Yeah.
Paper ballots would get me really excited.
Yeah. But the reality is you got to be, in order to legislate, you got to win elections.
Yep.
And
right.
And so we can cry foul about all those things, or we can buckle down, strap in, and, have the fight that we're going to have for the next 100 or less days until November 4th. And I think one of the things that if you're on the Republican team, if you're running for Congress, if you're running for the president of the United States, if you're running anywhere else, and you're going to talk about the new presumptive nominee, I think the first thing that you do is you point out the fact that she is the deciding vote in the Senate. Now, many times that doesn't matter, but in our current environment, it matters a whole lot, because what are the two biggest deciding votes, tiebreaker votes, that but for her don't get passed in the United States Senate? Well, that would be the Inflation Reduction Act and Biden's COVID measures. And if you are having problems affording your groceries right now, Joe Biden signed the legislation, right? She's almost more culpable. She voted for it.
Yes, right.
And not like one of 100 Congress people that voted for it. She literally sat there and could have said, no, I'm not going for this. Right. And she made the decision. And so I think if you tie her toes, we can get right back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, how does this affect everyday people?
Yeah, and it does. And it does. And that's the point. And so, as we wrap up here, there's so much fascinating stuff about the convention, by the way. I can kind of geek out with you on that, right? It's so interesting to me. It really is, because there's a whole sort of world outside of that, and a whole business structure around it, and just so many networking opportunities. But really what you said is the most important way, I think, to end this, which is our Republican hearts want to vote like it hurts us. Like, we want to vote the day of. We want to go to the polls like I did with my dad. I'd love to be on a paper ballot, things that other countries have figured out how to have an election in one day and know who won that night. But the reality is, and I keep saying this, and I'm so glad you brought it up, we're not in power right now. We're not in control. And in New Jersey, this is true as well. Until we can be in power, we work with the tools we have. We climb the mountain with what we have, and we do it better than them. Look what happened, Bob, in Mercer County at the last cycle in New Jersey, where there was a huge mess the day of. So
I remember that, Elizabeth,
right?
Because it was my election.
Yes, it was.
And I'm going to give some credit here. I'll give some credit. The NRCC's lawyer, the NJGOP's lawyer, were on the phone with me within minutes.
Yeah.
They checked the chain of custody of those ballots, because they had to go to paper. The machines were screwed up. They weren't taking ballots. So you could fill out the ballot, but you couldn't feed it in. So they checked the chain of custody. And my one question to them was, okay, these ballots go into a block box and they get transported to a vault. Who drives them? Well, it's one Republican and one Democrat election worker who drives them. And then they go into a vault where both mine and my opponent's representatives were there to watch the count. And at that point I said, okay, I'm fine with everything that you're doing then. And we also have to remember not to just freak out when we read a headline until we understand the details. Yeah. In business, you have to do that all the time. You see a number, it blows your mind, and then you flip a couple pages back and you start to understand.
Yeah.
And I got calls from all sorts of people, Elizabeth. Hey, you can make a lot of issues about this. If you ever want to run again, you'll get 1 million Instagram followers if you just say your election was stolen. And my feeling was, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But until I understand the details, until I understand the chain of custody, until I understand what measures are being taken, I'm not going to say anything. It's why it took me 2 days to finally concede, because I wanted all the votes counted.
Sure.
I wanted to understand. So as Republicans, we've got to keep a level head on our shoulders this election.
Yes.
Go to the polls. We've got to vote. We've got to do it in droves that we've never done before. And you know what? I've got a lot of, you know me, Elizabeth, we talked about this the last time I was on your show. I'm the eternal optimist in some ways. I've got faith in people. I think if you don't have faith in people, you shouldn't be in politics.
No.
And definitely. So I've got faith in people. And my hope is that we will not have 4 years of Kamala Harris as our president.
That is my hope as well. And I'm with you on that. But we have to do the work, right? You have to earn it. We have to do the work. They're going to do the work. And in the end, Bob, I feel like the truth always should matter and always comes up and comes out. And it feels like maybe we're moving into a season where the truth gets told a little bit more than it has in the past. Not sure about that, but there are good signs. So people should feel encouraged. And let's end with saying, vote early, bank your vote. Don't wait till election day. Don't be stubborn. Let's deal with what we have. And by the way, get 5 other people to vote who have never voted before or just, haven't been that involved, because that's how we overcome whatever situations occur. We don't know. And really, Bob, we didn't get to adjudicate a lot of what we thought was election fraud throughout the country. Some of it got adjudicated. A lot of it never did. So we don't really have answers. It becomes conspiracy theories. We don't know what to do. All of it makes you stand still. No, don't stand still. Vote early. So Bob, just one last message to all the people out there to keep them excited.
If anybody's got any doubts about voting early, from my own personal situation, I'll be traveling internationally, and I will be home a day or 2 before the election. I'm voting early because just in case I get caught, my flight gets canceled, I can't make it, I want to make sure my vote's in. And this is coming from a guy who wants to take his wife and his 2 daughters to the election booth. And I'm going to miss that. I'm going to miss out on a really special moment with my family because that's how important this election is.
Amen. Well, God willing, you'll have those opportunities in the future with 2 older daughters, right? Maybe 4 years from now, and they'll understand it more. But thank you, Bob. I appreciate your insight into all this. It's so fun to talk to you about it, and keep us in the loop of what your plans are, because we really, really believe you're an important part of this party. I think you bring balance, perspective, intelligence, and I think it's going to turn into something important for us in the future.
You're really too kind, Elizabeth. I love hanging out with you. I'm happy to be here anytime you want me.
You got it, Bob. All right. And to my audience, guys, you heard what Bob said. Take this seriously. Please don't be stubborn. Let's use the tools we have to overcome everything so we can get back in power and right the ship. See, Bob, you see how I brought that in at the end? All right. Great to see you, Bob. And to my audience, guys, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.